A little bit more about Covanta. We are a waste to energy company, so essentially we are taking municipal solid waste and we are converting that into steam and electricity, either to be reused within our own operations or actually to power some of the homes in the municipalities that we actually serve. We're going to be rebranding as a sustainable materials management company, given some of the pieces of our business or lines of business that we have to divert waste from the landfills. So we're very much focused on a zero waste to landfill philosophy. Not zero trust networking, but ZWTL instead. But we annually divert about 21 million tons of waste from the landfills. We recycle and reuse over 1 million tons of materials, which includes about 550,000 tons of metals and also about 100 million gallons of wastewater. And we use that back into our processing as part of the waste to energy conversion process. We currently have about 70 facilities located across the North America in both Canada and in the United States. And we have two primary lines of business. I've talked about the waste to energy business, but we also have an environmental services line of business where we're working with partnering companies to help them recycle their waste into other reusable products. So a very good example is we partner with Continental Tire in Sumter, North Carolina, and we help them process their tires from a trash perspective and are part of the process to convert that rubber into playground mulch and other things like that. So there's a couple of other really exciting things that we're getting involved in. Sustainability is obviously the way to progress the organization, and we're really excited about some of the opportunities that are going to be in front of us. So watch this space, if you will, and see what comes next for Covanta. So with regards to my cybersecurity program, both at Versum and also here at Covanta, my title is A Tale of Two Companies, building an OT cybersecurity program. And, you know, they were both manufacturing companies, two companies, two different industries, and I worked with two different partners for the efforts in our OT security programs that we built at both of these companies. The thing that I want to spend a little bit of time on with all of you today is talking about what are the things that I can attribute to the success of the program. And these are the same ones I talked about the last time I was here, but they're a little bit different in how they played out in Covanta versus in the world of Versum. So I want to talk to you about those and give you some examples of things that resonated within the program development, how we got buy-in, how we have performed our implementation, and kind of where we are right now. So definitely will entertain questions. This is the only slide I have. In fact, when I sent this to Eric and Sid, they were like, do you know you're doing a case study, not a panel? And I'm like, yep, I only need one slide. It's okay. So this is a slide, but I'll talk through these keys to success to share with you. So the thing, as I sat here today and listened to a lot of the presentations, a lot of the things that you heard throughout the course of the day, I will also comment on. And we talked just this last session when we were talking about MSPs or MSSPs, we were talking about how important the relationships are whenever you start a program or try to develop a program for your company or the organization that you're responsible for. I think the one thing that is extremely important with regards to building the program is making sure you find that foundation and you build that foundation and build a relationship of trust between your IT and your OT organizations. When I got hired by my CIO back in June of 2020 during the pandemic, there was, my number one priority was supposed to be you need to improve the cybersecurity posture of our operating facilities. And I said, okay, that's good, but these people don't know me. I need a little bit of time. I'm from IT and I'm here to help, and they're kind of tired of that message, right? But as the CISO, even though I report into the IT organization, it was important for them to understand that I was not just representing IT, but I had to represent the entire company. And I couldn't find myself in a position where there was some sort of cyber event that potentially impacted production operations. And as the CISO, I didn't have the opportunity to say, oh, sorry, that's not mine. Somebody else is dealing with that. So that was part of the foundation building that had to happen. So in September of 2020, just a few months after I started, I had the opportunity to go talk to the board of directors about where our cybersecurity program was at. The one thing I can share with you that that September 20th presentation, nobody had talked to our board about cyber prior since May of 2018. So they hadn't heard a lot. They were not very well versed, honestly, in kind of some of the risks of the organization. And we spent a lot of time actually talking about the risks that were present at our operating facilities. So we burn trash. We have, incinerators. We have boilers, equipment that is now connected that poses a substantial threat, not only to the community, but also to the operations and our employees. So at that board meeting, I had spent some time prior to that meeting talking to our CEO as well as our chief operating officer. And with their support, we got through that board meeting and we had a much more thorough understanding by the board with regards to what these risks were and the ones that we were currently challenged with within our operating facilities. And the fact that we needed to make sure we were investing and making this a priority for the organization to mitigate these cyber risks. The thing that was most helpful out of that board meeting was that we now had tone from the top. We had support from the executive leadership team, from the board of directors, recognizing where we currently sat organizationally from a risk perspective as it pertained to cyber. And it was at that point in time we had the opportunity to begin the development of what our program was actually going to look like. So I made a couple of rounds to our facilities. They needed to know who I was and why I was there. And I also needed not only to have that tone from the top, but as you heard throughout the course of the day today as well, it's also extremely important to have the partnerships built with your engineering and your operations team as well. So by doing the site tours, I took the time to meet with a lot of the facility personnel and talk to them about what we do as a company, what they do, how they do it, what their historical pain points have been, and what is the impact of an outage in our production operations, whether planned or unplanned. The thing that was probably most important in those conversations was I listened. I wanted to hear from them what was most important to them and ask questions for understanding. I didn't go into the facility like this. I went in with my hard hat and my jeans and my boots, because as you can imagine, our facilities are pretty dirty and also pretty smelly, since we're dealing with trash. So it's very important to, walk the talk and look and act like the people who you're at the facility, so you're not from corporate and perceived that way. So we didn't talk about IT tools or security tools, but we talked about their SCADA systems, we talked about boiler downtimes, we talked about their PLCs, we talked about their control room operations, right? So, to break down that wall of somebody from IT coming to talk to them or somebody from security coming to talk to them. So, got board support in September, made the rounds with the troops, got buy-in from our engineering and our operations team, and on February 5th of 2021, we kicked off our 3-year program, $6.5 million We refer to that affectionately now as our Secure Operations Program, as John and Jenny and some others from Verve can attest to. The kickoff meeting with the board was at 3 p.m. that Friday afternoon. IT was there, operations was there, engineering was there, legal, finance, and risk and compliance were all present in the room. So we had all of our stakeholder groups identified to recognize the fact that we were all in this together and needed to go after this collectively as an organization. We talked about what our approach was going to be, what our scope was, and how much it was going to cost. And the biggest success criteria from the board, the program board at that point, was, okay, go ahead and get it done, but do not impact plant operations at all. Challenge accepted. So you may be wondering why the date and time is so prevalent in my memory to talk about, but does anybody else remember what happened that day? So we left the program board, and immediately through all of our notification and news alerts that we got, that was the same day that the Oldsmar, Florida water treatment team was reporting their near miss as a result of a team viewer violation, where somebody had gotten into their systems and had adjusted the levels of the sodium hydroxide into the water supply. That had the operator not caught that, the entire water supply for the community would have been tainted that weekend. And that was actually Super Bowl weekend when the Buccaneers beat the Chiefs in the Tampa Bay Stadium. So that also would have had a much bigger impact, as you can imagine, had that operator not actually taken notice to the fact that those levels had been altered. So that ended up being a very, I'll call it serendipitous to the Covanta program. And serendipitous is usually a happy or a beneficial set of events that occur. So certainly not happy, but definitely beneficial for me, because I use that as an opportunity to capitalize on the messaging back to the program board and to the board of directors. The other thing that made it very interesting for us is that Covanta actually has facilities about 15 miles down the road from that Oldsmar, Florida water treatment facility. So it was our neighbor, and it was happening to them. So it gave me some additional credibility, some additional fuel to educate the senior executives in the organization about, this is the stuff that I'm talking about, and this is why it's important, and why we need to address the deficiencies we currently have in our program today. So yes, I'm still on point number one, but that is the most important one, I will tell you that. The more time that you spend on building the relationships, the more successful you're actually going to be. The other challenge is making sure that the peer group that you're working with understands that this is not an IT problem. This is a business problem. So what we did to mitigate that or dispel that is, when we put the program structure together, for every project work stream, there was actually a two-in-the-box approach. There was somebody from IT who led the design and architecture, but then there was also somebody from the OT organization who was partnered with that person, so that together they had to agree with what the design and architecture was going to look like. And we made them jointly accountable for the success of their project work stream. This wasn't going to be a we versus them game. We were all in this together, as I said earlier, and we had to be aligned as a team so that we knew what our goals were and how we were going to accomplish them. I already said that. And then from an overall, from a corporate responsibility perspective, it became much more obvious to them. I talked about me as the CISO not being able to, shirk the OT responsibilities and represent any cyber event that actually happens within the organization. And that was a point to continually drive home with my OT stakeholders and counterparts and partners. And that became even more relevant. And I think John even referenced this earlier today, and we didn't compare notes, right? But the questions that showed up on the renewal of our cybersecurity insurance in 2021 were much more geared to industrial control system, controls, OT security, et cetera. So I didn't go fill that questionnaire out by myself. I said, oh, look at the type of questions that we're being asked to answer now. And we collected that information, we answered, and we responded to those questions together. But it built more of the foundation that said, okay, this is a problem that we collectively have to work together on. The other thing, in addition to the IT and the OT partnerships within the organization, was actually identifying the partner that we were going to work with to implement our network segmentation, because we essentially had a flat network, and that is obviously very dangerous in this world. And we actually chose Verve, and they have been a tremendous partner with us throughout this. In fact, we took them along to one of our first pilot facilities, and I will say that they won over the hearts and the minds of the OT folks when they were there, because they understood, they spoke the same language, they dressed the part, and got down to the nitty-gritty and understanding what the pain points were of the organization as well. They brought a wealth of industry experience. I like to describe Verve actually as the partner who was an industrial controls company first, security second, and then they've built upon that credibility based upon the historical knowledge of the organization. It's so important to make sure that you have all of the seats on the bus filled with the right people to ensure your success. Verve has helped us with our efforts. We started February of 2021, and actually as of last week, we have successfully segmented all of our sites that were currently in scope. We've actually deployed the Verve Software Solution Center that John talked about earlier, and they're also helping us put in some other components in our security toolkit. Things like Acronis for our backups and Carbon Black for our application whitelisting and such. And it's been a great experience to the point where it's been recognized by our executive team for the success that we've had, minimal disruption to plant operations, and we got it actually done ahead of time, because we were given a stretch target to say, okay, we want you to do this, but now we want you to do it faster. So 3 years became 2.25 years, basically, which was the challenge that was cast. So that's point number one. I promise I won't talk as much about the others. Not that they're any less important, but I'm a big relationships person, and it's so important to success. So I encourage all of you to take the time and invest in those relationships to help you on your journey. The other one we've heard, the second one, is making security somewhat synonymous with safety. This is a manufacturing world. Safety is or always should be the number one priority for any manufacturing organization. We want everybody to go home as safe and secure as they arrived that day. And the more you can actually intertwine your security messages with the security program, the more it will resonate with your plant personnel. So many of the key messages for both of those topics resonate. We've all heard the see something, say something, or preventative maintenance prevents unplanned outages. You want your safety and your security controls to work together to mitigate risk and minimize the business impact. One of the other examples, to kind of keep it real, that we had at Covanta along these lines is there was a lot of, questions from the CFO and the new leadership team that was brought in. Well, what is this segmentation thing, right? So how do you explain it and distill it down into business terms? Because firewalls really don't mean too much to them. They don't really care, and access control lists and things like that. So When we started to have this conversation, we talked about, equating uh, a ransomware attack to a fire. So a fire is a very real thing for us, right? We've got boilers, we've got incinerators. If y'all have seen Toy Story 4 with Woody in the incinerator, yes, that was us. We were the inspiration for that. But in 2017, we actually experienced a second alarm fire at one of our facilities in Lorton, Virginia, our Fairfax facility. And that fire took the facility offline for 10 months that we were not in operations. So I use that as an example that fire was self-contained at that Lorton, Virginia facility. Without some network segmentation, if we would find ourselves in the middle of a ransomware attack, it would not be contained to just Lorton, Virginia, and would spread across the entire fleet. And that is when it clicked. That is when it resonated. That said, okay, I get what we need to do and why we need to do it. I told you the second one wouldn't be as long as the first one. So number 3 is know what you have and what you want. And we've heard this again throughout the course of the day today, is that you can't protect what you don't know you have. So how do you figure out what's out there, right? And we've talked about tools to collect that information. Historically, when you walk in and you're trying to figure it out, it's on spreadsheets that are outdated, they're not maintained, and it's just, I got to do a physical inventory and start all over again. So one of the things that we built on, we identified where our pilot sites were actually going to be. And we actually had a few sites at Covanta that are NERC regulated. Not very many, only 3. And those 3 are also classified as low impact facilities. So from a requirements perspective, from a NERC perspective, the list is relatively small, but if not followed and not adhered to, can definitely come with significant fines and penalties. So we partnered with our NERC compliance officer to ensure we got the inventory requirements right. We spent some time updating our cyber assets for our bulk electric systems, and even getting some of the OT folks to wrap their head around, well, what's a cyber asset and what's not a cyber asset, right? We took a lot of time actually going through that education process. You all know these systems are old. They've been in existence for 30 plus years. They really weren't intended to be on the network at any point in time, but then somebody wants to remotely access it, and they want a network connection because they want data off of it, and the story goes on and on. So getting that asset register and asset inventory in a system that can then manage those assets and see what's actually changing is extremely important. The next piece of that is, okay, so that's where I'm starting. Where do I want to end? What does the end state actually look like? What is going to be in my toolkit when I'm done? And making sure that you develop a set of operating principles that your team has their head wrapped around with. So we would start a lot of our meetings with a reminder that said, okay, don't take down any facility operations. That's kind of operating principle number 1. But then here are the rules that we're trying to make sure we adhere to as we go through this process. We're not going to allow internet connections on the south side of the firewall in the OT environment. How are we going to allow that to happen? How do we want people to remotely access? And really coming up with, what the rules of engagement were really going to be. Those seem like simple questions, but I'm sure as many of you know, those devils are in the details. And it takes a lot of time sorting that out to make sure everybody is on the same page, that you're not talking past one another, or you're not making assumptions based upon what you believe, and then somebody else has a different opinion about that. Okay, number 4 is around conducting a risk assessment. And again, we heard about that a little bit earlier as well. So that's, it's all coming together, which is awesome. But, we talked about the fact that we have different types of facilities. Not all of the facilities need to be treated equally. They have different systems. They have different processes. So what is the fit for purpose set of security controls that need to be in place? And making sure you're risk ranking them applying the right level of controls based upon the risk appetite of the organization, what they're willing to accept and what they're not willing to accept, which is a very different conversation than anybody had ever had with them in the past, because it was always like, do it all and just get it done. And then the dollar figure goes up incrementally, and we have way more, in some cases, shiny objects that maybe we didn't need in a particular environment. So we really broke it down based upon the classification of the sites that we were working on and what was appropriate for those facilities. The other thing that you want to do is understand what the impact of an outage is, and how you want to mitigate those risks. What happens as a system is offline? How much revenue are we going to lose? How long can the facility operate without some sort of connectivity? What's the downstream impact? That was something else that we talked about earlier today with regards to business operations. And being able to have those conversations to help you develop what your plan is helps you build that credibility, as well as putting together a very appropriate risk mitigation effort for the organization. With that information and having that risk assessment completed, you can have a much different conversation with your business partners, with your OT stakeholders. You can make informed decisions based upon that risk assessment. You can determine how much money and how much time the business is actually willing to invest into mitigating a risk. You can discuss new threats and vulnerabilities in the context of business risk. If there's a new CVE that is released for a particular piece of equipment, you can more quickly assess if you have that system, where you have that system, and determine the risk of the vulnerability, and then decide when, if, how you're going to actually mitigate that. That conversation becomes very different when you have data available to you to have that informed conversation and allow your business to make a very solid decision based upon what the reality of the risk is and the impact to their business is. The last one that I have, and I'll wrap up with this, is, we have this program, it's got everybody's attention, we've got resources dedicated to it, got a partner who's strongly engaged with us, we're all moving forward and driving to get it done. We're going to be done at the end of March with commissioning all of our systems, but it doesn't end there, right? This is never done from that perspective. You need to make sure that you keep it real and build the sustainable nature of what has to happen to keep the program running so that you don't go backwards. We've just spent all this money, all this time, all these resources to get us to where we are today. Now we need to make sure that we continue to sustain it and feed it, because if we don't, it will fail or die in the organization. It will be way too easy for people to resort to their old habits and continue to do what they did prior to the project, and then that will be a failure. So fostering the relationships continues to be important, setting up, just regular meetings to have conversations about what's going on from a business perspective. Is your business landscape actually changing? What new equipment is being brought in? Where does that need to be slotted into the architecture? What are the rules? What VLAN does it need to exist in? So you have a much different conversation now based upon what's there today. You want to make sure that your processes are now converged between IT and OT. We've talked about that as well, whether that's incident management, whether that's change management, how this is all going to work together. One of the biggest things that I heard when I was doing those site visits in the very beginning was, IT always makes these changes, they don't tell us, and it breaks something or it takes something offline. That's not allowed anymore, right? Because if there's a change that's being implemented, it needs to be documented, it needs to be reviewed, and it needs to be approved with whatever the impact is. The segmentation has obviously helped us a lot, because when we're making changes that are specific to IT, they shouldn't be making their way into the OT environment. But the same thing goes true from our OT organization. There are times when they've made changes that have negatively impacted the IT organization. So now we're trying to bring that all together. Understanding how the business is changing, I did talk about that a little bit. We're going through a significant amount of change right now at Covanta with this rebranding, changing the focus to a sustainable materials management company, getting into a whole bunch of new businesses that we haven't done before. So I think we're going to hear about acquisitions in a little bit, and continuing to be proactive and visible at your facilities. Make sure they know who you are. I don't want the only time they hear from me when something bad is going on in the environment. So always maintain an open line of communications and engage them when needed, and even if not needed, so that they are aware of who you are, what your responsibilities are, and how you can help them. So I think I touched on kind of all 6 things from a keys to success perspective. We are well on our way, almost done with our secure operations program, which I'm very excited about. I'm looking forward to the next phase when we get to see all of our tools in action and really get those solidified and commissioned in the organization. So maybe next year we can have a different conversation about all of the great things that happened as a result of having those tools in place. So thank you.